The hall was too loud and too bright, and Harry was sitting in the middle of it, eating nothing. He had tried for the porridge. He had moved the spoon through it long enough that it had grown cold and developed a skin, and then he had set the spoon down and stared at the table instead. Across from him, Hermione was reading the prophet with her bushy hair curtaining her face on both sides, like she was building a small fort out of herself. She had stopped asking if he wanted her to pass things. He was grateful for that, even though gratefulness felt like a strange thing to feel about being left alone. The Slytherin table was loud. It was always loud these days in a specific way that had a target in it, the kind of noise that knew where to land. Harry had learned not to look. Looking only confirmed that they were looking back. At the far end of the Gryffindor table, Ron Weasley was eating 4 breakfasts with the industrious dedication of someone who had decided that toast was a sufficient substitute for a best friend. Harry had memorized the particular angle of Ron's shoulders. Turned just enough to make the message unmistakable, just not enough that anyone could prove it deliberate. Harry understood it. He hated it. He understood it, anyway, because he had been 11 once, and he knew what it was to believe that the world was being unfair to you specifically, and that you were the only one who could see it. He made himself look at the rest of the hall. The Beauxbatons girls sat with a kind of liquid ease that made the Gryffindor table look like a furniture showroom. The Durmstrang boys clustered around Victor Crumb at the far end of the hall, and Crumb himself sat in their center like a stone dropped into water, broad and dark and unhappy-looking. The fourth-year girls at 3 different tables had not stopped glancing at him in 11 days. Crumb had not appeared to notice any of them, which Harry suspected made it worse. Cedric Diggory was moving through the hall between the Hufflepuff table and the staff table, and the hall moved with him. Not consciously, but Harry watched it happen. Conversations pausing as he passed, faces turning, the gentle current of admiration that followed him like weather. He was tall and grey-eyed and broad-shouldered, and he walked like someone who had always taken up exactly as much space as he was supposed to. He caught Harry's eye from across the room and gave him a single nod, sportsmanlike. The kind of nod that did not ask for anything in return and did not apologize for what it couldn't give. Harry looked back at his cold porridge. The wand-weighing ceremony was at 10 o'clock in a classroom off the Great Hall, and by 5 minutes past 10, Harry was the last champion to arrive. The room smelled of old wood and candle wax. Ollivander was already there, upright and attentive in the way of very old men who have had decades to perfect the impression of stillness, his large, pale eyes moving between the champion's hands without appearing to move at all. Fleur Delacour stood nearest the door with her wand already out and her chin slightly elevated. Victor Crumb stood at the far wall with his arms folded and his expression the same as it was at every meal. Cedric stood near the window with his wand at his side and his hands easy. Harry stood wherever there was space. There were officials, and there was a camera, and there was Rita Skeeter. Harry had not seen her clearly before now. She was shorter than he expected, round-faced and elaborately kept, with an architectural arrangement of golden curls and robes, the color of something that would be toxic if you ingested it. She wore jeweled spectacles that caught the light when she moved. She was watching him before he had finished looking at the room, which meant she had been watching him the whole time he was looking. The examinations took approximately forever. Ollivander handled each wand with the particular reverence of someone receiving a living thing. Fleur's wand produced a shower of pale pink sparks when he drew from it, and he said several admiring things about the velar hair core that made Fleur's expression go carefully neutral. Victor Crumb's wand was dark-wooded, and this Ollivander announced with an appreciative tilt of the head, was Gregorovich's work, a fine maker, though the styling was never quite what he. And here, Ollivander seemed to remember that Crom was standing right there and moved smoothly on. Cedric's wand was ash, 12¼ inches, pleasingly springy, and produced a fan of grey smoke that drifted toward the ceiling and vanished into nothing. Harry watched Cedric receive this information with a quiet smile, and thought, that is what it looks like when a boy has never needed to hold himself in suspense, waiting for everything to go wrong. Ollivander took his wand and held it to the light with both hands, and something in the old man's expression shifted. Not quite softness, but an attentiveness that was specific to this particular wand, to the 11 inches of holly and the phoenix feather core that had chosen him at age 11, and not before. Ollivander drew from it a fountain of red and gold sparks that fell like rain and vanished before they reached the floor. He returned the wand without comment beyond. 11 inches holly, phoenix feather supple, still in excellent condition. Harry tucked it away. He did not see Rita Skeeter move. She was simply suddenly beside him, steering him by the elbow with a professional gentleness that did not ask his opinion. And then there was a door. And then there was a cupboard. It was a small cupboard. There was a camera equipment case and a folding stool and the smell of dust and whatever the house elves used to clean things that did not need to be cleaned very often. Skeeter settled herself on the equipment case with her parchment and her acid green quick quotes quill, and gave Harry the warm, bright smile of a woman who had already decided what this story was going to be. The quill started moving before she had finished her first question. Harry watched it. He watched it transcribe his answer into something it had invented entirely on its own, something that involved his brilliant green eyes, which the quill apparently found a more interesting subject than anything he was actually saying. The quill looped and curled with an enthusiasm that had nothing to do with accuracy. He thought about the binding magical contract. Not for the first time. He had been thinking about it for 11 days, the way you think about a locked door when you are standing in a burning room, not because the thinking helps, but because stopping felt like surrender. The goblet of fire had selected him, and the contract had been made, and no adult in this castle could undo what the goblet had written into the magic itself. Dumbledore had said so. McGonagall had said so. In the careful way she said things she found intolerable. Clearly, quietly, as though she was making sure the words were exactly right, before she had to stop being able to take them back. He was 14 years old, and he was competing in a tournament designed for 17-year-olds, and no one was coming to stop it. Hermione had gone to the library 3 separate times looking for a loophole, and had come back each time with the same expression, the one that meant she had found the information, and the information was bad. She had not stopped looking. He did not think it would help. No one was going to come to stop it. He thought about 3 days ago. The hospital wing on a grey Thursday morning, the smell of dittany and antiseptic. Madame Pomfrey's voice reading back her own clinical notes in a tone he had not heard from an adult before. A tone that was trying very hard not to sound like what it was. 4 years of Septembers in her handwriting, each September its own entry, each entry its own inventory. He had listened to her read them, and he had not said anything at all, because there had not been anything to say. He had carried what she gave him, folded inside his Transfiguration textbook, for 3 days. He had not told anyone. He had not known what to do with it, which had been true for most of his life about most things. He had not known that he would know, until right now in this particular cupboard, watching a quill invent him from scratch. Harry reached into his pocket. "Put the quill down," he said. Skeeter's eyes moved from her parchment to his face. The warm smile was still there, but it had stilled at the edges, like a portrait told to hold its expression. "I have a real story," Harry said. He put the folded document on the stool between them. He did not look at her face when she looked down at it. He looked at the wall, at a crack in the plaster shaped like nothing in particular, and he waited for her to decide what she was going to do with it. 3 days before, he placed a folded document on a stool in a broom cupboard and changed everything. Harry Potter walked to the hospital wing without a wound. This was unusual enough that Madame Pomfrey looked up from her instrument cabinet with the expression she reserved for students who arrived between emergencies. She had a way of assessing injuries before a student reached the door. Years of practice had made it automatic, and Harry watched her eyes move over him in one efficient sweep, shins to shoulders, nothing bleeding, no obvious swelling. The hospital wing was empty on a Tuesday afternoon in early November. The beds were made up and crisp, white curtains folded back at each bedpost, the smell of dittany and something herbal hanging in the cool air. Pomfrey set down the instrument she had been polishing and folded her hands on the counter. "You're not hurt," she said. "No," Harry said. "I have a question." He had been deciding how to ask it since the beginning of October. Not what to ask that had always been clear, but whether asking was something he was allowed to do, and whether she would look at him differently if he did, and whether differently would mean worse or better. He had spent most of October discovering that none of those considerations made the question go away. He had spent the first week of November deciding that they did not need to. He had arrived at a single conclusion, that turning up and speaking was the only method that remained. "I want to know what my record shows," he said. "Every September I've come here every year. What did you write down?" The silence that followed lasted 2 or 3 seconds at the most. Madame Pomfrey had seen a great deal in her career, and she did not easily show surprise, but something shifted in her expression for those seconds. A stillness beneath the composure, the way a surface responds when something moves through it from below. Then she nodded. Once, and went to her records cabinet. She had kept careful records. She always kept careful records. It was the discipline of her profession, the architecture of it, the one reliable constant when patients resisted treatment or Quidditch accidents arrived faster than she could manage. Or the castle produced some new and creative reason for a child to require emergency attention. She pulled the 4th-year file, then the 3rd, then the 2nd, and the 1st. 4 folders, each one thicker than you'd expect from a single annual intake visit. She carried them to the examination bed nearest the window, and sat down and opened the 1st. She did not read it aloud yet. She read it through herself first. Harry Potter, September 1991, September 1992, September 1993. She sat with all 4 files open in front of her and did not look up for a long moment, and Harry sat on the edge of the bed across from her and did not ask what she was reading, because something about the quality of the silence told him that he would know soon enough. "Sit down," she said. And then she remembered he was already sitting. "Stay there," she read them aloud. She had always written in the precise, unembellished shorthand of a medical professional, the kind designed to communicate observation without interpretation, and the shorthand now did its work in the worst possible way, each entry crisp and exact and devoid of editorializing. Weight below expected range for age and height. September 1991, weight significantly below expected range. September 1992, notation referencing the preceding summer. Evidence of food restriction over an extended period. Weight below expected range again in September 1993, again in September 1994. And beside the weight notation, for that very first September, a separate entry in careful ink, healed fracture of the left radius, improperly set, approximately 6 to 12 months prior, corrected during examination. History of injury per patient. Fell from bicycle. She had written it down. She had corrected the bone and sent him on to his first week of classes. Harry sat very still while she read. He did not speak. She found, partway through the third file, that she was intensely grateful for that, because she did not know what she would have done if he had. When she finished, she set the last folder down on the bed between them. "Write it down," Harry said, "formally, everything you observed, not as a complaint, as a record. I need someone to have it in writing, someone official." Her hands were not entirely steady when she picked up the quill. She was aware of this, and she set her jaw and did not acknowledge it. She was a woman who believed very firmly in the practical value of continuing to act while feeling terrible. She had suspected, she had noted, she had not reported. The reasons had been logical at the time. Albus Dumbledore had placed the boy there himself. She knew this the way you know institutional things, through the accumulation of partial information and the spaces between what people say and what they do not. He had told the staff only that Harry Potter lived with his aunt and uncle in Surrey and that the arrangement was necessary, and she had understood this to mean that it was a considered arrangement and that someone with more authority and a broader view of the whole situation had weighed the options and arrived at a conclusion. If she had reported her concerns to Dumbledore, she would have been reporting to the author of the arrangement. The ministry was the other avenue, and she had considered it exactly once, in the boy's second year, and had found that there was no channel there either. No office, no official, no procedure designed for a wizarding child in a Muggle household. She had looked, and she had found nothing, and she had treated that absence as an answer of a kind which was not the same as it being an answer. So, she had treated what each September presented her with, and written it down and told herself that surely someone with more authority and a clearer view was attending to the rest. She had told herself that, specifically, every September for 4 years, the quill moved across the parchment. She did not write interpretations, she wrote observations, each one dated, each one exact. She was making a document now that she had always had the professional standing to make. She chose not to follow too far the thought of the 3 years she had not made it. It took her just over 20 minutes. She blotted the last line, read the document through, once from the beginning without allowing herself to pause at anything, and folded it twice. She held it for a moment before she held it out. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. Harry looked at her. His eyes were very green and very steady, and he was 14 years old and had the face of someone who had been deciding something for a long time and had recently finished. "I haven't decided yet," he said. He had decided. She gave him the document. He took it with both hands carefully and tucked it inside his robes. He said thank you in the voice of someone who meant something larger than the words. She said, "You're welcome." Neither of them said anything else, and so he went to the door, and she stood in the middle of the hospital wing and watched him go. She stood there for a while after he had gone. She was thinking about September 1991. A small boy arriving at Hogwarts for the very first time, far too thin for 11 years old, with round glasses and a lightning bolt scar on his forehead and a left arm that had been broken at some point in the preceding months and had healed without medical attention. She had asked him about it. He had told her, without hesitation and without any particular emotion, that he had fallen off his bicycle. She had written it down. She had corrected the bone and sent him on his way, and she had been doing that specific thing, recording and moving on, noting and not following, treating the wound and not asking about the wound behind the wound. For 4 years, once every September, in the place of whatever it was she should have done instead. She crossed to the cabinet and put the 4 files back in their proper order and closed the drawer. She stood with her hand flat on the cabinet for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she took it away and went back to her work. She did not tell herself she had done the right thing. Skeeter read the document without looking up. The quick quotes quill, which had been producing something involving the word heartbroken in Harry's voice at a pace completely unrelated to anything Harry was actually saying, slowed and then stopped. It stood upright in the inkwell with what Harry thought was almost an air of offense, though that might have been him. Projecting the cupboard was quiet, in a way it had not been since they had entered it. Skeeter turned to the second page. Her jaw was working slightly, the way someone's does when they are reading, and their mind is moving faster than their eyes. She read the second side, and turned back to the first, and read something a second time. The warmth had gone from her face, not dramatically, not like someone pulling off a mask, more like a change in the quality of light, the kind where you look up and cannot say precisely when it shifted. What was there in its place was something harder and more specific, attention pure and calculated, without any social performance at all. Harry had the peculiar experience of seeing what Rita Skeeter actually looked like when there was nobody to perform for. She was a great deal more impressive in that mode, and he was not sure whether that was a reassuring discovery or a concerning one. She took her time, he let her. When she looked up, the jeweled spectacles caught the light from the single lamp in the cupboard corner. "How old were you?" she said. Her voice was different too. No warmth, no register of artificial sympathy, just the question sitting cleanly in the air between them. "When I started sleeping in the cupboard, I don't know. I've been there as long as I can remember." And this fracture. She did not look up from the document. The arm. "I don't know when exactly I was young. I've always been more careful since. So probably before I started school." She was evaluating something, calculating whether what he was telling her was consistent with what she was reading, whether the two accounts fit together in the way that true things fit together when tested from different angles. Then she reached for the quick quotes quill. "Tell me," she said, "exactly what you told the matron from the beginning." This time, the quill did not invent. Harry told her about the cupboard under the stairs at 4 Privet Drive. The spiders in the corners, the pipes that ran through one wall and knocked when the heating came on, the way the lock was on the outside of the door. He told her about the clothes, Dudley's cast-offs from several sizes ago, so large they fell off him, which had made primary school rather specific in certain ways he did not elaborate on. He told her about the summers. The food was always precise, which meant always not quite enough, which meant that every September he arrived at Hogwarts and ate carefully and steadily for about 3 days before his body stopped sending him alerts. He told her about the summer before his 2nd year, the bars that had appeared on his bedroom window and the cat flap that had been fitted to his bedroom door, and he told her in the same register he had used for Pumphrey. Flat, factual, without decoration. He was aware, while talking, that he had very few comparisons to offer because 4 Privet Drive had been his entire reference for what home meant until he was 11 years old, and someone handed him a letter addressed to the cupboard under the stairs, and the whole architecture of normal rearranged itself. The quill wrote what he said. Its movements were different when it was working, honestly shorter strokes, more purposeful, without the looping enthusiasm it brought to fabrication. Skeeter asked 4 follow-up questions, and they were precise questions, the kind that landed in the gaps he had left without putting words there that were not his. And Harry understood that she was very good at her actual job when she was doing it. He signed the bottom of the account where she indicated. She set it face down on top of the medical document and looked at him. "You understand," she said, "that once I publish this, you cannot take it back." "Yes," Harry said. She waited, offering him time to say something else. He did not. She tucked the parchment and the document together inside the case she had brought, and she closed the clasp with a sound that was very final for something so small. Harry got up and opened the cupboard door. He walked back through the wand weighing room. The official with the camera was packing away his equipment. The chairs had been moved to the edges, and the room felt larger now, emptier the way a stage does after the performance has ended and the furniture is not yet cleared. Ollivander was gone. Crumb had gone. Harry moved through the middle of the empty room and past the door and into the corridor, and at the far end of the corridor, leaning against the stone wall with his arms folded and his magical eye making its slow, continuous revolution, was Mad Eye Moody. Bartemius Crouch Jr., under a month of polyjuice potion, wearing a dead man's face and waiting. Harry did not know that. He knew only the grizzled figure, the heavily scarred face, the eye that tracked him independently of the other one as he came down the corridor, rotating in its socket with the particular motion of something that did not answer to the same rules as ordinary eyes. Moody had a way of looking at a person that made them feel examined rather than seen, turned over in the light. "Potter," Moody said. It was not a greeting. "Professor," Harry said. Moody watched him go by. Harry did not look back. He came out into the main body of the castle and stopped. Students moved around him in the ordinary current of a Thursday between periods, carrying books, arguing about something, going somewhere with certainty. He stood still in the middle of the current and tried to identify what he felt, not lighter. He had thought, some part of him had assumed, without quite articulating, the assumption that setting the thing down would produce the sensation of setting something down. It did not. What it produced was the feeling of the moment after the jump, when you are no longer on the ledge and not yet anywhere else, and your arms are doing something entirely unnecessary. He had 11 days until the first task. He had given the only material thing he had to give. He went to find Hermione. Rita Skeeter did not linger. She left through the castle's side entrance, walked to the edge of the Hogwarts grounds where apparition became possible, and from there moved to the outskirts of Hogsmeade, the all-wizarding village at the foot of the hill, close enough to the school that the lights of its windows were visible from the higher ground. She did not stop in Hogsmeade. She apparated from its edge to London, with her case held hard against her side and her mind already moving through what she had. By 7:30, she was at Barnabas Cuff's office door. Cuffy was still at his desk, which was characteristic of him. He ran the Daily Prophet the way certain people ran a kitchen, by staying in it long after everyone else had gone, taking the temperature of things when they were quiet, deciding on the morning's arrangement before the morning arrived. He was a careful man in most respects, and a political one in all of them, and the Daily Prophet under his editorship had navigated its ministry alignment with the particular steadiness of a paper that understood its access depended on not making itself inconvenient to the wrong people. When Skeeter came through his door without knocking and put her case on his desk and opened it, he looked at her with the expression of a man who had learned that her unannounced arrivals tended to require decisions he would have preferred to not have to make. She put the medical document on his desk. He looked at the letterhead. He looked at the name. He read the first entry and the second, and turned the page and read the rest. He set it down and looked at the account beside it. "Pomfrey's signature is on every page," Skeeter said. "The student account is signed and witnessed. Cuffy set both documents side by side. He thought about the ministry. He thought about the editorial position the prophet had held for the past decade and a half, and the access that position depended on, and the very specific nature of a story that implicated the Minister for Magic and the headmaster of Hogwarts in the same paragraph. He thought about what it would require of him to publish this, and then he thought about what it would mean if he did not, and someone else did. If we don't print it, he said, someone else will. No one else has it, Skeeter said. The silence between them lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Barnabas Cuffy picked up his quill, pulled a fresh sheet toward him, and began to draft the layout for the morning edition. The owls came at the same time they always came, but the morning did not proceed the way it always proceeded. Harry was already at the Gryffindor table when the first post owl arrived. He had not eaten anything. He had arrived early, with the specific intention of having something in front of him that he could pretend to eat, and there was a plate of toast and a cup of tea, and he had neither touched the toast nor drunk the tea. Hermione was beside him with her own breakfast going cold in the same pattern of deliberate avoidance. They had not spoken yet. The first owl dropped a copy of the Daily Prophet on the Hufflepuff table at the far end of the hall, and a second-year girl began to unfurl it in the ordinary way of second-year girls who had not yet discovered that this particular morning was not an ordinary morning. Harry watched her read the headline. He watched her read the first paragraph. He watched her not continue eating her porridge. Then the other owls arrived, and the hall began to change. It happened in pieces, not all at once. Each copy landing was a small event, a quiet event, and then the reading would start, and that part of the hall would change, and then the next copy would arrive. The noise did not stop all at once. It drained away in sections the way water drains, until what was left was a quality of silence that had nothing in common with ordinary morning quiet. This was a silence in which people were reading very carefully, and the people who did not yet have a copy were watching the people who did, waiting to see what their faces would do. Hermione had her copy before Harry could count another. He watched her read it. She was very still, which was not characteristic of Hermione when reading. She usually moved while she read, her head tilting, her hand coming up to push her hair back. She read, with her hands flat on the table on either side of the paper, and Harry thought she knew about his home. She had known in the way anyone who had been paying attention could know. But there was a difference, he supposed, between knowing something and seeing it in clinical ink under Poppy Pomfrey's letterhead. She didn't say anything for a long time. He was grateful. At the far end of the table, Ron Weasley had not yet received a copy. Harry watched him. Peripherally, the way you watch something you are pretending not to watch. A first-year boy passed with a copy tucked under his arm on the way to the Gryffindor message board, and Ron said something, and the first year stopped and handed it over without apparent complaint. Ron unfolded it. He held it at the particular angle of someone reading something they are not sure they want to be reading. His face did a series of things. Harry looked away before he could see what the things were. He looked at the staff table. He looked long enough to register that nearly all of them were reading, and then he looked at his plate. Minerva McGonagall read the article in the staff room after breakfast, sitting in the chair she had occupied for decades. She had waited until the others were gone. She was not sure why. A disinclination to read it in company, perhaps. A sense that whatever her reaction turned out to be, she would prefer to have it without an audience. She read it once, quickly. Then she read it again, slowly, from Pomfrey's summary forward. She set it down and looked at the fire for some time. The 1st of November, 1981. She had sat in her tabby cat form for the better part of a day, in a Surrey cul-de-sac, watching a house, waiting for Albus to arrive. She had known even before he came, what he intended. She had told him directly these were the worst sort of muggles. She had used those precise words, not people to leave a child with on any account. He had told her that Harry would be perfectly safe, that it was the best solution available. He had been kind about it and firm about it, and she had trusted him because she had trusted him for 40 years, and because he was usually right, and because she had not at that point had sufficient evidence to do otherwise. She remembered the house, small and neat and aggressively ordinary, a muggle car in the drive and net curtains at the windows. She had caught a glimpse of Petunia Dursley's face through the kitchen glass, a hard face and not a warm one. For 13 years, she had not sought additional evidence. She had seen the boy arrive each September. She had been his head of house for 3 years. She was not a woman who flinched from her own thoughts, and she did not flinch from this one. She had known that he arrived each September, wearing clothes that did not fit, and with the particular thinness of someone who had not had quite enough of anything. She had noted it, and said nothing, and the reason she had said nothing was the same reason Poppy Pomfrey had said nothing. She recognized that now, sitting here, because she had trusted Albus. Because reporting her concerns to Albus would have been reporting to the author of the arrangement. She picked up the paper again. She read the line that said, "Annual presentations consistent with nutritional deprivation," and she read the line that said, "Healed fracture, improperly set." And she set the paper face down on the arm of the chair. She had decades of sitting in this room to prepare her for a great many things. It had not prepared her for this. In the circular office high in Hogwarts' tallest tower, Albus Dumbledore read the article, folded the newspaper precisely along its original crease, and set it on the corner of his desk. He did not speak. Fawkes was on his perch, preening, and the silver instruments on their various small tables made their customary sounds, and the portraits of former headmasters continued their mid-morning drowsing. Nothing in the office had changed. He was thinking about Petunia Dursley's blood, not as a cruelty. He had not arranged the placement as a cruelty. He had arranged it because of the magic Lily had made the sacrifice that had woven itself into Harry at the moment of her death, and required a blood relation to anchor it. As long as Harry could call that house home, as long as Petunia Dursley's blood lived there, and Harry could return to it before he came of age, Voldemort could not touch him there. The protection. It had been real for 13 years. He had weighed a known existential danger against conditions he had known, truthfully, were imperfect. He had made the calculation, and then he had not revisited it. And the 13 years of not revisiting it felt, in this particular moment, quite different than they had felt yesterday. He had seen them arrive while he was reading, and he had left them there. Both bore the Wisengamot seal, plum wax, the silver W pressed in firmly. He did not open them yet. Cornelius Fudge read the article at his desk in the Ministry of Magic, with his lime-green bowler sitting on the corner of the desk where he always put it first thing in the morning. His first instinct was to send for Percy Weasley, who was capable and discreet, and whose position involved managing communications that required both qualities. Percy worked for Barty Crouch, however, not for him, and Crouch had been increasingly absent for reasons no one had satisfactorily explained, and sending for someone else's personal assistant without going through the appropriate channels on a morning when he already had a crisis seemed a step too many in precisely the wrong direction. He set the paper down. His aide brought him another copy, and then a third, which suggested that the aide was either trying to be thorough or simply did not know what else to do, and Fudge was not sure which interpretation was less concerning. The Owls had been arriving since he came in, 6 Wisengamot members in the first hour. He had looked at the names on the seals and set them aside. He sat for a moment looking at the blank parchment in front of him. Then he picked up his quill and began drafting a statement. He was not certain yet what the statement would say, but he needed to have started writing it, because starting to write it was the only thing that made any of this feel like something he could still manage. Across the hall at Hogwarts at the Gryffindor table, Hermione finally spoke. "Did you know this would happen?" she said. Her voice was very quiet. The hall was still in that particular silence. "I knew something would happen," Harry said. She considered that. "What do you want to do now?" Harry looked at the high windows of the great hall, at the grey November morning beyond them. The binding contract was still the binding contract. The tournament was still the tournament. He had done the one available thing. "I want to not be dead in 11 days, he said. Hermione had no answer for that. She pressed her lips together and looked back at the paper, and they sat in the enormous quiet of a hall full of people who had just learned something, and neither of them reached for any of the food. McGonagall did not knock. She had knocked on Albus Dumbledore's office door for decades. In wars, in crises, in the long, cold months after James and Lily died, she had knocked the night she came back from Surrey and told him his arrangement was a mistake, and he had heard her, and she had trusted what came next. She walked up the spiral stairs now without knocking, and set the folded newspaper on his desk without speaking. She did not sit. Dumbledore looked at the paper. He looked at the headline. He looked at her. His half-moon spectacles caught the light from the single window, and his long-fingered hands rested flat on the desk on either side of the folded page, and he did not react visibly to any of it, not to the paper, not to her face, not to the fact that she had entered without the courtesy she had always given him. "You already know," she said. "Yes," he said. "I have known since the first owls this morning. Then I won't waste time." She stood at the side of his desk, not in the visitor's chair. The visitor's chair was for people who had come to request things. She had not come to request. "I want to speak about the night of the 1st of November, 1981. A brief pause. Something moved behind his eyes. "I thought you might," he said. "I spent that day watching that house," she said. "From early in the morning until after dark. I sat on a garden wall in the cold, and I watched it. I told you afterward what I thought of those people. I used the phrase. I remember the phrase, Albus, I have not forgotten it in 13 years. I said they were the worst sort of muggles. I said it clearly. I said the boy should not go there. Dumbledore said nothing. You told me Harry would be fine." She said it without emphasis, just the statement, sitting in the air between them. "You said it would be the best solution available. You said, 'E will be fine, Minerva.'" A pause. What did fine mean to you? Specifically, what did that word contain? Dumbledore removed his half-moon spectacles and held them between his fingers for a moment. He set them on the desk. She had seen him remove those spectacles a handful of times in all the years she had known him, and each time had been a conversation worth remembering. He looked at her, and she had the experience, not unfamiliar, but not comfortable, of being seen very clearly by him. She did not look away. "I owe you an honest answer," he said. "2. So, I will give you one, and I ask that you hear it through." She made a small gesture. "Go on." The magic that Lily made when she died, the sacrifice that wove itself into her son at the moment of her death, required Harry to live with her blood, her sister's blood specifically. For the protection to hold, for Voldemort to be unable to touch him at that house, Harry had to be able to call it home. The magic required the blood relation. It required exactly what I arranged. He paused. The protection was real. It has been real for 13 years. It is the reason he is alive. "I know what the bond of blood is," McGonagall said. I am not arguing magic with you, Albus. I know the magic. Then you know why I chose the arrangement I chose. I know why you chose it. The words were very even. What I want to understand is how you chose to maintain it for 13 years, year after year, September after September, without once going back to look. You chose his safety from Voldemort over his safety in that house. That was the calculation. And you made it once, in November of 1981. And you did not revisit it. For 13 years, Dumbledore said. I believed the protection was more urgent. You believed a dark wizard who was not yet corporeal outweighed what was happening to that child. She did not raise her voice. She very seldom raised her voice. She found she did not need to. I told you, Albus, I stood outside that house. And I told you, he looked at her for a long time. He was not arguing. He did not look as though he was preparing to argue. He looked like a man who had already had this conversation with himself, and lost it, and was now having it with a witness. I made a choice I cannot now unmake, he said, and I am aware that this is not an adequate answer. I am aware that it may not be sufficient for what you need from me, but it is the honest one. McGonagall stood with her hands at her sides and looked at him. He was the most intelligent person she had ever known. She had trusted him for most of her adult life. He had known what she told him that night and had made his calculation anyway, and had never once told her to go and look again. She turned to go. Minerva! Not now! She said it quietly. It was not an invitation to continue. She closed the door behind her with both hands on the handle. Controlled. Click. Measured. She stood for a moment in the corridor with her back to the door. She had been disagreeing with Albus Dumbledore on various matters for decades, and had been wrong more often than she was right. She was not wrong now, and she was not sure whether that was any comfort at all. The door had not slammed. It was much worse than if it had. She found Potter in the corridor, outside the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. He was walking alone, carrying his Transfiguration textbook under one arm. He saw her coming and stopped, with the particular stillness of someone who has done something irreversible and is waiting to learn the exact shape of its consequence. She had prepared something on the stairs. Something measured and appropriate. Words that acknowledged the situation without extending any institutional commitment she was not yet authorized to make. She stood in front of him, and none of those words were the right ones. And she had been a teacher long enough to know that the right words were rarely the measured ones. You will have my complete support, she said, for what comes next. Harry Potter looked at her. He was 14 years old, in robes that had fit him somewhat better the previous September, glasses slightly bent at the left temple. He was looking at her with an expression she had not anticipated. Not relief, not gratitude exactly, but something more careful than either. The expression of someone who had expected to be in trouble. Thank you, Professor, he said. It was not adequate. She could see him knowing it was not adequate. She said, I want you to know that I said this to the headmaster as well. In different words, she did not explain what words. She did not explain what the conversation had contained. She did not think she needed to. He nodded once. I know, he said. And then, I'm sorry for the mess. She looked at him. Don't be, she said. She walked away before she could say anything more complicated than that. Hermione found Harry at lunch. She sat down across from him at the Gryffindor table. Ron was beside him now, close enough that their elbows were almost touching, which was not a small thing for either of them. And her face had the specific quality it had when she had gathered information and was deciding how to present it. 3 Wizengamot members have already owled Hogwarts, she said without preamble, asking for official confirmation of Pomfrey's identity and credentials, and requesting copies of any documentation still held at the school. She had clearly looked up the relevant procedures, because she added, "That's faster than their standard response timeline. They're treating it as a priority matter." Harry ate a spoonful of soup. "Is that good?" "I don't know yet," Hermione said. "I'll tell you when I do." The second letter arrived 2 hours later. A very large owl landed on Harry's shoulder in the Gryffindor common room, dropped its delivery, and left with the air of a bird that had more important things to attend to. Hermione recognized the handwriting on the envelope before Harry could. She had given Sirius her name for exactly this reason. A letter addressed to Harry Potter at Hogwarts might attract the wrong kind of attention given the current state of things at the Ministry. Harry opened it and read it. He read it twice. He held it out to Hermione. "Tell him I always knew it would come out somehow," Sirius had written in handwriting that was still unmistakably his. "Tell him I'm proud." And below that, after a gap that suggested it had been added separately, "I am also alive and currently very cold, which is not the point, but which I felt you should know." "He can't help himself," Harry said. "No," Hermione agreed. There was something in her expression that was, despite everything, close to a smile. Harry folded the letter and tucked it into his robe's pocket. He sat for a moment with his hand flat on the outside of his pocket, as though verifying that it was still there. Then he went back to his Transfiguration essay, which was due Friday and was not going to write itself. Cornelius Fudge had been at his desk since 7:30 in the morning, and had read his own official statement 11 times without finding it more persuasive on the 11th reading than he had on the first. The statement had seemed entirely adequate the previous afternoon. The Ministry was always aware of Mr. Sesher, Potter's care arrangements, and considered them satisfactory. It said everything and committed to nothing, which was precisely what a ministerial statement was supposed to do. He had approved the draft with confidence. The Daily Prophet had printed it that morning in a box above the fold on the front page. Directly below the box, in matching typeface, the Prophet had reprinted a selection from Pomfrey's medical documentation. Weight below expected range for age and height. Annual presentations consistent with nutritional deprivation. Healed fracture, improperly set. The editors had not written a headline for the juxtaposition. They had not needed to. The owls had been arriving since 6:30. His secretary kept bringing him updated counts. 9, then 12, then 14 members of the whizzing gamut, before 9 o'clock in the morning. Fudge looked at the count and thought about his argument. The argument was sound. This had been Dumbledore's arrangement. The Ministry had relied on the headmaster's professional judgment. No one could reasonably expect the Minister for Magic to independently scrutinize a placement made by Albus Dumbledore. The argument was entirely accurate. It was also true in a way that undermined the argument's usefulness considerably, that the Ministry of Magic had coordinated Harry Potter's annual return to the Dursleys for 10 consecutive years, and had done so without once asking Dumbledore or anyone else whether that coordination was still appropriate. He set the paper face down and did not pick it up again. 2 doors down the corridor, Percy Weasley was sitting at Bartemius Crouch's desk, managing the Department of International Magical Cooperation's correspondence on behalf of a department head who had not been in the office in 6 weeks, and reading the Daily Prophet with the particular stillness of someone who had recognized themselves in something they would have preferred not to recognize themselves in. The statement was there, above the fold. Percy had seen it in draft the previous afternoon and thought, accurate. Given what is known, he had not thought to ask himself, what is known specifically, and by whom? He read it again. Now he read the line about the healed fracture. He put the paper face down on Crouch's desk. The summer before Harry Potter's second year, Percy had been at the Burrow. In his room, reviewing the OW results he had just received, while Fred and George and Ron had taken their father's Ford Anglia and flown to Surrey in the middle of the night without telling anyone. He had known nothing about it until the following morning, when all three of them told him at breakfast, in the way they did everything simultaneously, from different directions, in voices too loud for the size of the kitchen. Fred said it first, because Fred always said things first. They'd barred his window purse, actual bars on the bedroom window, and a cat flap in the door for passing food through. Percy had thought Dumbledore must know. There must be a reason. He was 18 years old and had just received his first ministry job offer, and was very proud of his professional judgment. He had gone back to his toast, and the thing Fred said had settled into the category of things that Dumbledore and the relevant authorities presumably had in hand. He looked now at Crouch's files, organized precisely as Crouch had left them 6 weeks ago, the departmental correspondence paper with its ministry seal. The letters Percy had been signing in his own hand when the matters were routine, or leaving unsigned in a drawer for Crouch's eventual return. Crouch, who was ill, Percy had been told, and when he had pressed for detail, he had been told not to ask further. He did not know where his boss was. No one at the ministry would tell him. He picked up a quill. He set it down. He looked at the statement. The formal enquiry from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement arrived at Fudge's office by internal post at 10:30. It was signed by Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE, a square-jawed woman with a monocle and short grey hair whose formal enquiries were known throughout the ministry for the precision of their language and for the difficulty of answering them in any way that left the recipient looking well. She wanted to know on what specific date and through what specific mechanism the Ministry of Magic had independently verified Harry James Potter's welfare at 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, during each summer of the legal guardianship arrangement under which he had resided there. She had sent copies to 3 senior Wizengamot members. Fudge read it twice. She already knew the answer. That was the nature of Bones's formal enquiries. She sent them when she wanted the answer in writing. He tried the flu shortly before noon. Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts was on the network. The connection opened cleanly. The face in the green flames was recognizable. Long silver beard, half-moon spectacles. I will make a full statement to the Wizengamot at the appropriate time, Cornelius, Dumbledore said, in the measured tone of a man who had already decided exactly what he would and would not discuss. The flames went out. Fudge stood at his fireplace for a long moment. Then he walked back to his desk and read Bones's enquiry again, stopping at the part where it said, "What specific mechanism?" Arthur Weasley was at the kitchen table at the Burrow at 6 in the morning, with a cold cup of tea he had forgotten to drink, and the Daily Prophet and 3 days of not having told Molly. He had brought the paper home the night it was published and had not shown her. The evening had been full in the way the Burrow's evenings were always full. The garden, a letter from Bill, a ministry owl from Percy, about an administrative backlog, dinner for 5, and Arthur had moved the paper under the quibblers on the counter and not said, "You need to read this." He had been afraid of the conversation. Not about the article, about the part that preceded the article, the part that was his. He was always awake when his children came home. He had been in the kitchen when the Ford Anglia set down in the garden that August. At 4 in the morning, he heard the familiar thud of it in the grass, and went to the kitchen door and found Fred and George and Ron and Harry Potter with a trunk, all of them with the look of a mission completed and much still unexplained. Harry had stood in his kitchen, looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who was not entirely certain they were allowed to be there. He was a thin boy, thinner than he should have been for 12, wearing a shirt several sizes too large for him. Fred had said, "Dad, you should have seen where he lives." No joke in it. None at all. Not a trace of Fred's usual register. They'd barred his window. Bars on the bedroom window. Cat flap in the door for food. Arthur had thought, Dumbledore knows. He must have his reasons. He had made tea. He had sent Harry up to Ron's room. He had not written anything down. He had not said anything to Molly that night or in the morning or in the 2 years since. She had heard what Fred and George said. She had been as appalled as anyone, but what neither of them had said to each other in 2 years was, "Should we have done something? Should we have reported it? Should we have rung someone up and said, 'There is a 12-year-old boy living behind bars and a cat flap'?" He had told himself the headmaster must have had reasons. He had believed it, because believing it was easier than not believing it. That was not the same thing as it being true. And the truth was now in the Daily Prophet in Pomfrey's handwriting. The letter in front of him was addressed to the Ministry of Magic, from himself as a ministry employee, formally requesting clarification of ministry policy regarding the welfare of wizarding children placed under Muggle guardianship arrangements. He had not used names. He had written it as a general inquiry, as a matter of policy, because if it was a general inquiry, then the answer was about a system, and not about a specific kitchen table in a specific summer and a specific thought he had had, and a specific bed he had gone back to. He had been working on it for over an hour. He had the language right. He heard her footsteps on the stairs. He did not cover the letter. The morning of the 24th was the same as every other morning in one respect only. The castle was still standing, the tournament was still happening, and the binding magical contract. Harry had known this. He had always known this. He put on his robes anyway. The owls had not stopped arriving at Hogwarts since the article was published. He ate half of his breakfast, and Hermione said nothing, and Ron sat close enough that their elbows touched, and nobody said anything because there was nothing to say that was more useful than sitting there together, which was what they were already doing. He left for the Champions' tent at 9:30. The Hogwarts grounds in late November had a particular quality of grey, the sky low and even, the lake invisible at its far edges, the grass doing what November grass did in Scotland. He walked the path through the grounds with his hands in his robe pockets, and thought about the Horntail. He knew it was the Horntail. Moody had told him 11 days ago, after the wand-weighing ceremony, had told him which dragon, and told him to play to his strengths. He had spent 11 days knowing it was the Horntail, and knowing what his strengths were, and knowing what he intended to do, and none of that knowledge was making his hands less cold. The Champions' tent was canvas large enough to pace in. Harry was the last to arrive. Cedric Diggory was sitting with his hands loosely folded, the kind of ease that didn't need to be performed. Fleur Delacour stood near the entrance, silver-blonde hair and a stillness Harry recognized as concentration rather than calm. Victor Crumb stood at the far wall, with his arms crossed, looking at nothing in the way he'd been looking at nothing for 11 days. Harry had spent enough time watching him from across the great hall to know the expression was not the same as absence. Cedric looked across when Harry entered, and gave him the same nod he'd given across the great hall 11 days ago. Clean, specific, neither false sympathy nor false neutrality. He found a section of tent wall and stood near it. Ludo Bagman, broad, blonde, cheerful in the way of people who found other people's nerves entertaining, came in with a bag and explained the draw. Cedric reached in first and pulled a small Swedish short snout model, with a 1 around its neck, which meant he was going first. Fleur drew a Commonwealth's green. Crumb pulled a Chinese fireball. Harry reached into the bag and pulled out a tiny black dragon with yellow eyes, and a spiked tail, and the number 4 around its neck. It fit in his closed fist. It moved. He closed his hand around it. Bagman spoke while they waited. Encouragements, tactical points, things that sounded helpful but weren't. And the champions were called out one at a time. Cedric first, then Fleur, then Crumb. Harry remained in the tent and listened to the crowd beyond the canvas. The sounds rising and falling, the particular register that meant something was happening, but not what. He thought about 11 days. He thought about the document folded in a broom cupboard. He thought about Ron's elbow at breakfast. When they came for him, he stepped into the arena. The horntail was not something you were prepared for. It was not something that a miniature model in your closed fist prepared you for in any meaningful sense. It was vast and black and scaled, chained at the neck, with links thick as Harry's arm, and the chain described a perimeter, and the horntail filled it. It was crouched over a clutch of eggs in grey-brown stone, and it watched Harry enter with yellow eyes that held no uncertainty whatsoever about what he was. The crowd was a wall of noise on all sides. Harry registered it the way you register weather, as something present, something that would exist regardless of what happened next. He was looking at the dragon. Harry raised his wand. Accio Firebolt. He had never waited for anything the way he waited for his broom in those 7 seconds. It felt like a geological period. The horntail's neck began to extend, its tail lifting, the yellow eyes tracking him across the arena floor. He kept his eyes on the arena entrance, and then his firebolt came through at speed, and his hand closed around the handle, and he was off the ground, and the horntail's fire went through the space he had occupied a half-second before. The heat hit the backs of his legs. He went up. The crowd changed pitch. He didn't listen to it. He was looking at the horntail below him, watching its neck crane upward and track him. He needed the dragon, looking up, not down, looking at him instead of the eggs. He flew a circuit of the arena at altitude, drawing the horntail's attention with him, and he felt the moment the dragon's focus had shifted, and he dove. It was not a clean dive. The horntail had more lateral range than he had accounted for. Its neck snapped back as he came down, fire blooming in an unexpected direction, and he banked hard and felt something catch the outer edge of his left shoulder, a streak of heat that was pain before it registered as burn, and he was past it, and his hand closed on the golden egg, and he was climbing, and the egg vibrated faintly against his palm. He was above the horntail. He was holding a golden egg. The crowd made a sound that was not quite a sound anymore. It was a pressure. He looked down at the horntail, still tracking him, still chained, still furious. The document hadn't changed this. The dragon was still a dragon. He was still 14. The tournament was still the tournament. He came down. He landed badly. He always landed badly when his left side was compromised, and a wizard from the steward's section was there immediately to steer him toward the medical tent. He looked at his shoulder. He didn't look long. From the competitors' stands, Hermione Granger had been watching Harry Potter summon his broom. Go up, not die. Go up again, not die again, and come down, holding a large golden egg. She had watched all of this with her hands pressed flat against her mouth, and had not moved them once in the entire 11 minutes. Ron Weasley was beside her. He had come. He hadn't told Harry he was coming. He had just come, and he was here in the Hogwarts stand, and for the entire 11 minutes, his face had not been the face of someone who believed Harry Potter had entered this tournament for glory. His face had been the face of someone watching something that might go wrong at any moment, and knowing there was nothing they could do about it. "He's all right," Hermione said. Her voice was strange. "I know," Ron said. Neither of them said anything else. And In the medical tent below the arena, Madame Pomfrey assessed Harry's shoulder, clicked her tongue in the way that meant she wasn't satisfied with what she was looking at, and began applying a bright purple smoking liquid that was cold on contact and immediately reduced the pain to a dull, manageable complaint. Harry sat on the edge of a folding cot and let her work. "You'll have stiffness for 2 days," she said. "The tissue is intact." "You were fortunate." "I know," Harry said. The tent flap opened and closed. A ministry steward with something administrative. A few minutes later, another opening admitted a ministry owl with the formal brown ribbon of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement around its leg. It landed on the cot rail beside Harry. Pomfrey looked at the ribbon. She untied the letter and read it again. "They want my testimony," she said. Harry looked at her. "Will you give it?" She folded the letter once precisely and did not answer immediately, which was not how Pomfrey answered straightforward medical questions. She looked at the shoulder she had been treating, then at the letter, then at Harry. "I already gave it," she said, "to you, a beat. But yes, I'll give it to whoever asks." She went back to his shoulder. He sat still and let her. It was 20 minutes before the tent flap opened again, and Ron Weasley came in. He hadn't prepared anything. Harry could see that immediately. The absence of a prepared speech was visible in the way Ron stood in the entrance, hands at his sides, his expression doing something complicated with itself. He had spent the walk down from the stands composing something, and arrived without it. His freckled face had the look of someone who had been awake since the 13th, and Harry had looked like that too, and probably still did. "I'm sorry," Ron said. 2 words. The right 2 words. Harry looked at him for a moment. "All right," Harry said. Ron came in and sat on the cot across from him, and Pomfrey moved around them both without comment, and the golden egg sat on the canvas floor with its faint vibration, and the noise of the dispersing crowd came through the tent walls, and Harry's shoulder would ache for 2 days, and none of that was the point. The point was that Ron had come, and he was here, and Harry was not in a medical tent alone. The investigators from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement arrived at the hospital wing at 9:30 on a Tuesday, 3 days after the first task. There were 2 of them, a witch with a clipboard and a wizard with a quill, not a quick quotes quill, just a quill, held in his own hand, making its own ordinary movement. Madame Pomfrey showed them in, laid 4 folders on the examination bed nearest the window, and opened them in sequence. She told them where to begin. They began. She gave the testimony in the same register she had used to write 4 years of medical notes, clinical, unembellished, entry by entry. September 1991, a boy arrived severely underweight for his age and height, with a left arm that had been broken at some point in the preceding year, and had healed without medical attention, and was therefore no longer entirely straight. She had corrected it. She had noted the weight. She had asked about the arm and been told about a bicycle. She had written bicycle. September 1992, the weight below expected range again, more significantly than the previous year. A notation in that entry specifically referenced the preceding summer. Evidence of food restriction over an extended period. She read this aloud without pause. She had written food restriction because that was what the weight loss pattern indicated, and she had noted it in clinical terms because that was what clinical terms were for. September 1993. September 1994. Each year the same presenting pattern, with variations of degree. The weight below standard by a consistent margin that should have stopped being consistent after the 1st September, and had not. The investigators took notes. The wizard's quill moved at the pace of someone writing actual words. Pomfrey did not look up from her folders. She had thought, in the 3 days between receiving Bones's formal summons and this morning, that testifying would produce some feeling. Relief, perhaps, or dread, or the specific discomfort of doing something earlier than she should have done it under conditions that made doing it earlier impossible to explain without implicating herself. What she found instead was that the testimony itself was not difficult. She had excellent notes. The notes said what happened. She read them aloud. They would be in the record now. They had, in a real sense, always been in the record. In her files, in her cabinet, in the corner of this room where they had lived for 4 years unread by anyone except her, and, 3 weeks ago, by Harry Potter. The difficulty was not the testimony. When the investigators finished and asked whether she would appear before the Wisingamot if the matter required it, she said yes, without hesitation. It was the first thing in this entire process she had not needed to think about. They left. She stood in the middle of the hospital wing and looked at the 4 open folders on the examination bed. She did not move for a long moment. Then she closed them in sequence, put them under her arm, crossed to the cabinet, and filed them exactly where they had been. She went back to work. There was always work. In the staff room, on the other side of the castle, Severus Snape was sitting in the chair he always sat in, the one in the far corner with the slightly abbreviated armrest, which no one else used, reading a professional journal when Professor Sprout came in and mentioned to Flitwick, in the conversational way of people sharing institutional information, that she had heard the DMLE investigators had been in the hospital wing all morning taking Poppy Pomfrey's formal testimony. Snape turned a page. He read the first paragraph on the new page without registering any of its words. He set the journal down. He looked at the fire for some time. He did not say anything to either of them. He got up and left. He walked to the dungeons. The particular sequence of turns between the staff room and the potions corridor was not something he had to think about after 20 years. He walked it automatically, and the automaticity was useful this morning because he was thinking about something else. He was thinking about a potions classroom in September of 1991, the first class of his 13th year of teaching, the first years filing through the dungeon door, in the particular tentative way of children who had not yet determined which rooms in this castle were safe and which were not. He had watched the door, as he always watched the door, at the start of a year. The Potter boy had come through it last, as though he was trying to occupy as little of the entrance as possible. He had been very thin in a manner that a man who had spent 13 years watching children arrive in September recognized as a specific kind of thin, the kind that accumulated over a summer, the kind that had a shape to it that did not come from a single missed meal or a single bad week. Snape had noted it the way he noted everything, efficiently, categorically, and then continued with the classroom at hand, because the classroom was 30 children, and the register, and the first lesson, and it was not the place for anything else. He had noted, the boy is thin. He had noted the robes and new school, supplies had been bought, which meant money was found for what the ministry required even if it was not found for other things. He had noted the round glasses held together with tape. He had continued with the lesson. He had, in 13 years of teaching, noted a great number of things about a great number of children. He had been shaped by his own particular formation to notice certain things in a classroom, because certain things in a classroom were indicators of certain things outside it, and a child who came in September looking like Harry Potter had looked in September 1991. That information went somewhere in him where information of that particular kind went. He had closed over it. He had continued with every lesson since. In his office, he did not deliberate for long. He had decided in the corridor what he was going to write, which was a formal statement of professionally observed fact addressed to Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. It would not contain Albus Dumbledore's name. He was not writing a condemnation. He was not writing in opposition to anyone. He was writing what he had observed in his professional capacity, that in September 1991, Harry James Potter's physical presentation was consistent with significant and sustained nutritional deprivation. He was writing, "I name no cause and draw no conclusion. I offer only what I witnessed." He wrote it, he sealed it, he gave it to the school hour before he could reconsider, because reconsidering would have required extended time in the company of his own reasoning, which was something he preferred to avoid at present. The letter was gone. He prepared the next day's lesson plans. The lesson plans were concrete. The lesson plans would happen regardless of what else was happening, and there was a great deal to be said for things that happened regardless. The news that a letter had been sent reached Hermione Granger through a chain of fragments, something overheard in the staff corridor, confirmed in a different form at breakfast the following morning, completed by a comment she caught at the library counter that she had not pursued further. She did not know the letter's contents. She knew it had been sent. She knew who had sent it, and to whom. She told Harry that evening by the fire in the Gryffindor common room. Ron was across from them reading something, doing a poor job of pretending he wasn't listening. "Snape sent a letter to Amelia Bones," she said. Harry looked at her. "Snape." "It wasn't a question," she said. "Snape." He was quiet. He did not like Snape. He had not liked Snape for 4 years, and was not going to perform some reversal of that on the basis of a letter he hadn't read. He thought of the man in the dungeons at a desk, writing something, and the image would not settle into any category he recognized, so he put it somewhere else instead. "All right," he said. He went back to his essay. Ron kept reading his book, or pretending to, which amounted to the same thing. The note came on a Tuesday, delivered not by a house elf, but by Professor McGonagall herself, who found Harry in the corridor after charms and handed it to him without any explanation beyond. "For you?" She was gone before he could ask anything. He read it. "Please come to my office at your convenience. There is no urgency. I will not demand your time." He read it again. The word that stopped him was please. He went the following morning. The gargoyle at the foot of the spiral staircase moved aside without requiring a password, whether because Dumbledore had arranged it, or because the gargoyle had made its own assessment of the situation. The staircase revolved, slow and continuous, and Harry put his hands in his robe pockets and let it carry him up, and watched the stone go by. He had been in this office 4 times before. He knew the circular room, the portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses in their heavy frames, most of them pretending to be asleep. He knew the sorting hat on its shelf, the silver instruments on the side tables making their small and various sounds. He knew about forks, the phoenix on the perch, near the window, scarlet and gold, and still genuinely startling regardless of how many times you had seen him. He knew the quality of the light in that room, high-windowed and northern, the particular way the winter grey came through. He was on the stairs now, trying to work out what he felt. He had been expecting to know. For the 3 days since the note arrived, he had assumed that approaching this conversation would clarify things, that climbing these stairs would resolve itself into something recognizable, anger, which was available to him, and would have been reasonable, or relief, or the satisfaction you were supposed to feel when something true became officially acknowledged. He found none of those on the stairs. What he found was something closer to the sensation after a long illness, when the fever has broken and the emergency is over, and what remains is simply the exhaustion of having had it. He was 14 years old and very tired. The staircase brought him to the top, and the door was open. Dumbledore was at his desk. He looked up when Harry entered and waited. Did not start talking while Harry was still crossing the room, which Harry registered as a small courtesy. He gestured to the chair across from the desk, and Harry sat. "Thank you for coming," Dumbledore said. "You wrote, please," Harry said, "in the note." "I did. I meant it." No accusation in his manner. No suggestion that Harry had done wrong by going to the press. No weight in the room that felt like consequence for Harry as opposed to consequence in general. He sat with his hands folded on the desk and his half-moon spectacles catching the grey light from the windows, and he looked at Harry with the quality of attention he had always brought to their conversations. Attentive, specific, the quality that had produced across 4 years. It was not producing that feeling right now, but it was recognizable. "I owe you an explanation," Dumbledore said. "Rather than an accounting of my intentions, the intentions were real. What I built with them is another matter, and you deserve to hear it." He paused. Not hesitation, but precision. "When your mother died," Dumbledore said, "she made something. Not deliberately. There was no deliberate magic in that moment, only the choice she made and the love she had at the moment of making it. But magic and choice and love did not separate cleanly, and what they produced, your mother's sacrifice, created a protection that fixed itself to you, and that protection required, for its continued function, a blood relation. Petunia Dursley shared Lily's blood. She was the only available relation. As long as you could call the house that Petunia Dursley lived in your home, as long as you returned there each year before you came of age, and could genuinely call it yours, Voldemort could not harm you within those walls. The magic required the residence. The magic required specifically the arrangement I made. He stopped. Harry was quiet. He had known pieces of this, had heard the phrase, bond of blood, referenced without the full explanation ever arriving. Now it had arrived, and what he found was that it had the texture of things that were accurate and complicated simultaneously. It was true. The protection was real. Voldemort had come for him twice, and Harry was alive, and neither of those facts cancelled the other. He waited until he was certain Dumbledore had finished. "Did you know," he said, "that they were hurting me?" The question fell into the room like something heavy. Dumbledore did not answer immediately. It was not the hesitation of guilt. Harry had seen guilt perform itself often enough to recognize the performance, but the precision of a man not going to give a carelessly inaccurate answer to a question that did not allow for inaccuracy. "I knew the conditions were imperfect," Dumbledore said. "A cupboard is not imperfect conditions," Harry said. "A cupboard is a cell." Dumbledore was still, not with discomfort, with a gravity that Harry associated with very large things being acknowledged rather than argued away. He did not rephrase it. He did not recontextualize it. He let it stand where Harry had put it. "I believed," Dumbledore said, "that the threat Voldemort represented was the greater danger, a known danger, an existential one. I weighed it against conditions I knew were not what I would have wished, and I chose the placement that addressed the larger threat." He looked at Harry steadily. "I made a choice I cannot now unmake. I am aware that this falls short of what you might rightfully expect from me. But it is honest, and I am going to be honest with you. Whatever else I have failed at, Harry sat with this, not an apology. He was not going to tell himself it was an apology. What it was, he thought, was the maximum of what Dumbledore was currently capable of producing. An admission of a choice made, and the acceptance that the choice had been wrong, offered without the comfort of a good reason to make it feel right. He had imagined this conversation many times since November, and the imagined version had always produced some clear feeling in him. The actual version produced something more difficult to name. "When I'm 17, Harry said. "When the protection ends, when I'm of age and can't call it home anymore, what happens then?" Dumbledore looked at him. Something in his expression shifted, not visibly enough to describe, but Harry had been watching adults' faces for information since before he could articulate why, and he registered the shift, the weight of something that had been carried a long time and was now being set down, partially, in front of him. "When Voldemort returns," Dumbledore said, and Harry heard the word, when, not if, we will have other protections in place, other preparations made. "I have not been idle on that account. When?" Harry said. "Yes, when. You know he's coming back." Harry said it flat, the way you say something that is just a fact. "You've known, and you sent me back to that house anyway, because of a protection that ends at 17, and there's something else you've been preparing for after it ends. And you haven't told me what that is." Dumbledore sat across the desk, and Harry could see him reach the boundary of what he was going to say. He had reasons. Harry was entirely certain of this, that Dumbledore had reasons for everything, that his reasons were layered and considered and almost certainly more sophisticated than anything Harry could produce in this moment. He was not offering the reasons. He sat at the boundary of what he would say, and stayed there. "No," Dumbledore said. "Not yet." Harry stood up, not in anger, or perhaps in anger, but a quiet, exhausted kind that did not have any interest in being dramatic. He stood up from the chair. "Thank you," he said. He meant the honesty. He went to the door and down the revolving staircase and past the gargoyle. He came out into the corridor below the tower and stopped. He had expected something to arrive when the conversation ended, the satisfaction of having been seen clearly, or of having said the thing that needed saying in front of the person it most needed to be said in front of, or of having made Dumbledore sit with the word cell in a room he could not leave. He had sat across from Albus Dumbledore and heard him say, "I made a choice I cannot now unmake," and now he was in a corridor feeling 14 and worn through, and the feeling was not what he had been working toward, but it was what was there. There was a question in front of him, whether to go back up the stairs and say the one more thing he had thought of on the way down. He stood with it for a moment. He went to find his friends. Arthur Weasley had been carrying the newspaper for 3 days. He had told himself each morning that he would tell her at breakfast, set it on the table, let her pick it up herself, spare himself the need to find words. He had told himself this on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, and on Thursday morning. He had taken the paper from the kitchen counter and slid it deeper into the stack of quibblers and gone to work. He was not certain what he was afraid of. He had been married to Molly for over 20 years, and her anger was known territory. What he was afraid of was that Molly's anger would require him to say certain things aloud that he had not yet finished not saying to himself. Molly found it on Thursday evening. She was looking for the quibbler. The newspaper came out from under the stack, and she almost set it aside without looking at the date. And then she looked, and she read the headline, and she stood at the kitchen counter and read the front page without sitting down. She turned to the continuation on page 4 and read the excerpts from Pomfrey's medical documentation. She read them with the attention she gave a potion she wasn't certain about, reading for exact meaning. Weight below expected range for age and height. She knew what that looked like. She had weighed 7 children and could tell the difference between small and underfed, annual presentations consistent with nutritional deprivation, a left arm healed without medical attention. She set the newspaper on the counter when she had finished it, and put both hands flat on the counter. She did not move for a long moment. She had been cooking at this counter when Fred and George and Ron had come through the door 2 summers ago with Harry Potter and a flying car. She had been at this counter, approximately, when she heard the word cat flap and told herself the headmaster must have had his reasons. Molly Weasley was not a woman who wept when she was furious. She had learned, over years of raising children in a house that was always too small and always full of something going wrong, that weeping while furious was an indulgence she could not afford. What she felt standing at the counter was cold and quiet, and had several addresses. She thought about the summer before Harry's 2nd year. She had been in bed. Arthur was always awake when the children were out late. The Ford Anglia set down in the garden at 4 in the morning. She heard the engine and came downstairs in her dressing gown and found Fred and George and Ron in her kitchen with Harry Potter and a trunk. Fred told her. He always told her things. He was constitutionally incapable of sitting on a story. He said, bars on the bedroom window, actual metal bars bolted in, a cat flap in the door for food, padlocks on the outside of the door. He said it quickly in the way he did when a thing was genuinely upsetting and he wanted to put it behind him. George said, it was pretty bad, Mum. Ron's face said everything Ron wasn't saying. She had thought. Dumbledore knows. She had thought this. Albus Dumbledore is not a careless man. The boy is placed there for reasons Dumbledore understands. It is not for me to second-guess him. And then she had sent the boys up to bed and put Harry Potter in Percy's room. In 2 years of subsequent Septembers and Christmases, she had never written to Dumbledore and asked, I need to know that this is all right. Someone should check. The word for what she had done in the moment she thought, Dumbledore knows, and went back upstairs, was not a word Molly enjoyed wearing, but she was not going to run from it just because it didn't fit comfortably. The rage had several addresses, and one of them was her own kitchen. Arthur appeared in the doorway. He said, Molly, I meant to— I know, she said. Sit down, Arthur. He sat. She found parchment and her good quill in the kitchen drawer and sat across from him and wrote. She wrote for a long time. Arthur sat across from her and watched, and did not say anything beyond one attempt at, perhaps you should wait until, which ended when she looked up from the parchment, briefly. Once the letter said, what happened was not his fault. It said that the summer before his 2nd year, 3 of her children had come home from Privet Drive and told her what they had found, and she had trusted that someone with more authority had the matter in hand, and she had been wrong to trust that without checking. She wrote that she was more angry than she had words for, and that the anger was not at him. The anger had an address, and he was not at it. She wrote, You have always been welcome at this table. That was true before this article, and it is true now. The last line said, You should have been able to tell us. That is not your fault. It is ours. She sealed it and sent it with Errol, who made it out of the garden in roughly the right direction. The letter arrived at Hogwarts on Friday evening. The castle in December smelled of pine and candle wax, garlands on the staircases, the Yule Ball 2 weeks away, and the particular low ceiling feeling in the common rooms that came from 4th years who had not yet asked anyone to attend with them. Harry was sitting by the Gryffindor fire at 9:30 with his potions textbook open, and the fire getting low. He recognized the handwriting on the envelope before he recognized the owl. He opened it. He had received post this year that was difficult to receive, howlers in the early weeks, which he had not opened himself, ministry notices about the tournament and his obligations under it. Sirius's letters via Hermione's name, short and fond and slightly chilly in the way you got from someone living in a cave. He had developed a habit this year of bracing before he opened anything, a particular steadying of himself that had become automatic. He was braced now, holding an envelope from a sender he already knew. And then he read the first line, and the bracing came apart. He read the letter once without stopping, and went back to the beginning and read it again. He read the part that said, "You have always been welcome at this table." He read, "You should have been able to tell us. That is not your fault, it is ours." He sat with the letter in his lap, and the fire went down another inch, and the common room was empty around him. He had a wide experience of adults who had failed him, and a much narrower experience of adults who said so plainly. He did not cry. He felt something adjacent to it but different, something with more room in it than crying. He sat with it. He was still sitting there when Ron came through the portrait hole close to midnight, back from the library. Ron saw him. He stopped. He looked at Harry, and at the letter in Harry's lap, and he crossed the room without making a production of it, and read the letter over Harry's shoulder. Harry did not tell him not to, which Ron understood as permission. They had rebuilt enough of their understanding over the past 3 weeks that this was clear between them. Ron read the letter. He sat down in the armchair next to Harry and didn't say anything. Some clock somewhere in the castle counted midnight. Ron did not suggest going to bed, and Harry did not suggest it either, and at some point after midnight the fire went to embers, and then to ash, and the common room was dark, except for the light that came under the portrait hole. They sat there together until the fire went entirely out, and then a little while longer after that. In London, the formal notification went out to all 50 Wizengamot members on Friday afternoon. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement's preliminary findings, Pomfrey's testimony, Snape's letter, 4 years of medical records, were distributed in sealed envelopes stamped with the DMLE crest. Albus Dumbledore, Chief Warlock, had recused himself from the matter in which he was named as a respondent. A deputy warlock would preside. The session was set for the following Thursday. Melia Bones signed each notification herself in her methodical hand, and by 5 o'clock Friday afternoon the owls were dispatched. Cornelius Fudge received his at his desk at 7 in the evening. He read it once and set it beside the cold tea he had not finished. The notification told him he would be required to testify before the full Wizengamot as a named party. He had known it was coming. He had known it was coming since Tuesday, when the first count of member owls had reached 14 before 9 o'clock in the morning. He sat at his desk for a long time with the notification in front of him, and the cold tea and the particular silence of an office that has stopped feeling like a safe place. The session was called for Thursday at 10 o'clock. Harry could not attend. He was not a Wizengamot member, not testifying, and the matter was a matter about him rather than one he had standing to participate in, which was one of those facts about being 14. He sat in the Gryffindor common room and watched the fire and waited. Hermione sat across from him with a book she was not reading. Ron sat beside him and did not bother pretending. The chamber of the Wizengamot was beneath the Ministry of Magic, in the underground complex, cold stone and polished floors, the particular air of a room that had never seen a window. The 50 members took their places in plum-colored robes, embroidered with silver W, filling the tiered benches that curved around the chamber floor. The deputy warlock, a witch with close-set eyes and a parliamentary voice, occupied the high seat from which Dumbledore would normally have presided. Dumbledore was not presiding. He was in the respondent's chair at the center of the floor, his hands on its arms, his half-moon spectacles catching the cold light. It was the first time many of the 50 had seen him seated where the accused sit. Cornelius Fudge was called first. He stood in the witness box and made his argument clearly. The ministry had relied entirely on Dumbledore's professional judgment. Fudge himself had no independent information of mistreatment. The arrangement predated his tenure and had been represented as a matter of magical necessity, established by the highest authority in Wizarding Britain. He said this without stammering, which required effort. Amelia Bones asked on what date the ministry had independently verified Harry Potter's welfare at 4 Privet Drive. He began to explain the ministry's basis for relying on Dumbledore's assessment. She said, "An independent verification, Minister." "What date?" He said the ministry had been informed by the headmaster. She said, "In 13 years." He confirmed, the ministry had not conducted independent welfare checks. She asked him to confirm, for the record, that the ministry had coordinated Harry Potter's annual return to 4 Privet Drive, Ive, for 10 years, and held no record of a single welfare verification in those 10 years. He confirmed it. His argument was factually accurate and answered the wrong question, and everyone in the chamber could hear the silence between what it said and what it did not. The formal censure of the Minister for Magic passed at 11:30. It was not a removal. The Wisengamot did not directly remove ministers under established structure, but a formal censure for negligence, read into the record and published in the afternoon editions, was not a thing a minister survived. Fudge had survived political crises before. He had not survived this. By 2 o'clock he had drafted his resignation, effective the following week, citing a wish to facilitate smooth transition. It was not better for the omission. Dumbledore was called at noon. He stood. He was taller than anyone else in the chamber, even now, even in the respondent's chair. He addressed the 50 members with the voice he had used for 33 years of Hogwarts speeches and Wisengamot sessions, measured, each word placed as though he had weighed it. He explained the bond of blood, the protection Lily Potter's sacrifice had created and fixed to her son, the magical requirement for a blood relation, Petunia Dursley as the only available relation who shared Lily's blood. He said the protection was real. He said Voldemort had come for the boy twice and the boy was alive. He said the conditions at 4 Privet Drive. I've had been, and he chose his phrase, deeply imperfect, not imperfect. Deeply. He did not dispute the medical records. He did not argue Pomfrey's documentation was wrong. He said, I knew conditions were not what I would have wished. I made a choice. I believed the magical protection, a protection as real as any in our world, outweighed risks I had not adequately measured. I held to that choice for 13 years, and I am here to account for it. Some members had the expression of people being moved against their intention. Dumbledore's case was not a weak case. The bond of blood was real. Voldemort was real. And Albus Dumbledore, at an age that surpassed the full careers of everyone in the chamber, remained the most persuasive voice in the room in his own defense. Then Minerva McGonagall was called. She walked to the witness box in her black robes and her square-rimmed glasses, and the expression she used for situations requiring exactness rather than sentiment. She did not look at Dumbledore in the respondent's chair as she passed him. She looked at the Deputy Warlock and stated the following for the formal record, that on the night of the 1st of November, 1981, she had personally witnessed Albus Dumbledore leave Harry James Potter on the doorstep of 4 Privet Drive, Ive, Little Whinging, Surrey, that she had on that same night warned Albus Dumbledore directly that the family at that address were, in her exact words, the worst sort of muggles. That Dumbledore had heard this warning and maintained his decision, that she had trusted his judgment afterward and not independently verified Harry Potter's welfare, in the 13 years that followed, that she considered this a failure of professional duty, and she named it as her own. She stated these things in order and returned to her seat without editorializing. She did not need to editorialize. What her testimony did was close the last available exit. Dumbledore had been warned from the first night, by a witness of impeccable standing, that the Dursleys were not suitable. His defense remained what it was. McGonagall's testimony did not make it less true. It made it sit differently in the room. The chamber was quiet after she returned to her seat in a way it had not been quiet before. The censure of Albus Dumbledore passed by 31 votes to 19. His removal as Chief Warlock passed by a narrower margin. His position as headmaster was not directly within the Wizengamot's jurisdiction, but 3 members of the Hogwarts Board of Governors had been seated in the public gallery. They convened by flu connection that same evening and voted to require Dumbledore to step down as headmaster pending a formal review, citing the board's established authority of suspension, the same mechanism that had been used in 1992. He was informed by Owl at 8 o'clock. Severus Snape was not inside the chamber. He was not a Wizengamot member. He had no standing there. He had come to the ministry for a separate errand completed before noon. He stood in the corridor outside the chamber with his back against the stone wall and his arms folded and listened to the 50 members file past. He had spent nearly 20 years in Dumbledore's service. He was not ready to say that service had been wrong. He was standing in a ministry corridor after a Thursday that had made things less simple rather than more, and he was holding the weight of a letter he had sent 3 weeks ago, a letter that was now in the Wizengamot's formal record, referenced in the summary of evidence this morning as confirmation of Harry Potter's September 1991. Consistent with significant nutritional deprivation, his name in a ministry chamber. He had heard it and had not moved. He had sent the letter because what he had witnessed was true, and he was a man who could not deny things that were in front of his face. A statement of observed fact, not a condemnation, not a choice of sides. It was the heaviest thing he had carried in a long time that did not have the name Lily attached to it. The news reached Harry at 9 o'clock. 2 owls arrived at Gryffindor Tower within minutes of each other. One was from Hermione's ministry contact, the other was from McGonagall in her precise hand to Harry directly. Fudge has resigned, effective next week. Dumbledore has been formally censured and removed as Chief Warlock. The Board of Governors has required his resignation as headmaster pending review. I will speak with you in the morning. He read both and set them in his lap. The common room was quiet, Ron on his left, Hermione on his right. He looked at the low fire. He had spent 6 weeks with this day in front of him like a fixed point, and now it had arrived, and he could not find the decisive feeling he had been expecting. The tournament was still running. Voldemort was still out there, but the truth was in the Wizengamot's record, in its official testimony, in the formal archive, and nobody could take that back. He picked up McGonagall's letter. He folded it carefully, the way you fold something you mean to keep. He was sitting on the stone steps outside the Great Hall the morning after the Wizengamot session, when Professor Moody came up the corridor below him, his magical eye rolling in its socket in the way it did when it was covering multiple directions at once. Harry watched him come. Moody stopped at the foot of the stairs and looked up, and his real eye, the dark one, the one that focused fixed on Harry, with the kind of attention that Harry had learned to accept from Moody without quite being comfortable with it. You brought down 2 careers, boy, Moody said. In 11 days I wouldn't have thought you had it in you. He walked past and up the stairs and was gone around the corner. Harry sat with it. He had received many things in the past 6 weeks that he had not known how to receive, and this was one of them. It was meant, he thought, as a compliment, and the reason it did not land as a compliment was something he spent a few minutes trying to work out. Malfoy's insults were simple. They came from a clear place of wanting to diminish him, and they were easy to dismiss because Malfoy was wrong about everything, and knew it, and carried on anyway. It was the observation of someone watching a chess piece perform an unexpected move, and what it implied, that what Harry had done was tactical, a play, a career-ending gambit, was not what it had been. He had not been thinking about careers. He had been thinking about a cupboard under the stairs. He went to breakfast. McGonagall found him afterward, in the corridor that ran along the east side of the castle, where the morning light came through the windows in long pale strips. She fell into step beside him rather than stopping him, which was a courtesy he recognized as deliberate. She was giving him a moving conversation rather than a confrontational one. "I expect you've heard," she said. "I heard last night." "Your letter," he paused. "Acting headmistress." "Yes." A brief silence, the kind she used when she was choosing her words with a care she did not always show. "I did not seek this position. I know. It changes nothing about the tournament. The binding contract still holds. I want to be certain that is clear between us. Nothing that has happened at the Wizengamot or the Board of Governors alters your obligation to compete, because nothing can." Her jaw was set in the way it was when she was telling him something she did not like telling him. "You will still need to complete the second task in February." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. They walked past a window, and the pale December light crossed her face briefly and was gone. "What it changes," she said, "is that you now have a headmistress who knows precisely what was done and who will not arrange for you to be kept in the dark about decisions that concern you. It is not everything you deserve, but it is what I have." He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, the way she did when she had said the thing she had come to say, and was waiting to see if it was enough. "Thank you, Professor," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "There's still a tournament." She turned at the next corridor and was gone. The Yule Ball was announced to the school on the 20th of December, which Harry already knew because champions had been notified separately, and he had been carrying the requirement around for weeks like a stone in his robe pocket. He was required to attend and to open the dancing, and he had asked someone, and that was sorted, and the whole enterprise had the quality of an obligation being completed rather than an occasion being anticipated. The castle dressed itself for Christmas in the way it always did, garlands and candles and the smell of pine that came from somewhere the students never identified, and the great hall was transformed on the night itself into something genuinely spectacular, ice sculptures and real snow overhead. Harry stood at the entrance in his dress robes, which were green and not the maroon things Ron had been issued by his mother, and he thought, "I am at a ball. I am 14 years old, and I am at a Yule Ball, at a school that is trying to kill me, and I am about to go dance in front of the entire school." He went in and danced, which was as awkward as anticipated, and he sat out most of the rest of the evening and watched Hermione, who had arrived with Victor Krum in pale blue robes, and looked like a person Harry had not previously met, and who was clearly having an entirely different evening than Harry was having. Krum was watching her with the single-minded focus he brought to Quidditch, Harry thought. Good, he thought it, and meant it without complication, which surprised him, and he filed it away. The night itself ended as these nights ended. Ron, who had spent a significant portion of it glaring at Hermione and Krum from across the room, for reasons Harry understood but was not going to speak to right now, was less than convivial on the walk back to Gryffindor Tower. Harry walked behind them and was quiet. Hermione was not quiet in her own mind, though she did not say what she was thinking to Ron, because what she was thinking was not about Ron. She was thinking about February. She was thinking about the golden egg in Harry's trunk, still not opened. They would need to open it soon. She was thinking about a tournament, designed to be dangerous, and a school year that was not finished being strange. The article had changed things that needed changing. It had not changed what the tournament was, or what was wrong with it, or why a fourth champion had been needed in the first place. She had been thinking about this since November in the way she thought about things, steadily, quietly, building toward a conclusion she had not yet reached. She did not have the conclusion. She was going to keep thinking until she did. Sirius's owl arrived the day after Christmas, addressed this time to Harry directly. The ministry had been occupied since November with investigations, depositions, Wiesengamot sessions, and the management of a ministerial transition, and the sustained attention it had been paying to a fugitive in Scotland had slipped. The owl arrived without incident in the Morning Post, an unfamiliar bird, but a familiar hand on the envelope. Harry read the letter by the common room fire. "What you did took more courage than anything I could have told you to do. Your father would have done the same. Your mother would have done it better. Both of those things are true. I love you, Harry. Sirius." A postscript, smaller. "I am still alive, and still cold. Do not worry about the cold part. Worry about the part where you have another task coming. There's something in that egg. Open it." Harry read the letter twice. He folded it with the letter from McGonagall, which he was keeping in the front pocket of his Transfiguration textbook, which was where he kept things he intended to look at again. He went to the window. Gryffindor Tower was high enough to see a good portion of the grounds from here, the dark shape of the Forbidden Forest at the edge of the property, the Black Lake going grey and flat under the December sky. He stood and looked at the grounds that he had crossed 43 days ago to face a Hungarian horntail, and the tournament was still running, and Voldemort was still out there doing whatever Voldemort was doing in whatever form he currently occupied, and Albus Dumbledore was still alive, just no longer in his seat of power, which was not a small thing, and was also not the same as things being fixed. Harry was still 14. He was still the fourth champion who could not be unchosen. But he had gone into this year with no one on his side, and a silence he had been keeping for as long as he could remember. He was not going to finish it that way. There was a godfather in a cave in Scotland who was alive and cold and writing him letters directly now. There was an acting headmistress who had said, "I will not keep you in the dark." There was a best friend who had come to the first task, without being asked, and said 2 words and meant all of them. There was a world that had read Pomfrey's records, and heard the number of Septembers and knew what a cupboard under the stairs looked like as a bedroom for 10 years. It was not enough. It was not close to enough. The tournament was not over, and whatever had put his name in the goblet was still in the school, and February was coming. But Harry James Potter had a start. He stood at the window and looked at the grounds and